It probably won't surprise any of you to learn that I play D&D. I've actually tried my hand at a couple of different TTRPGs, but D&D 5e is my favorite because I'm basic like that. But I'm also disabled, and I like to see and interact with worlds where characters like me exist. Which, with blindness and deafness being combat conditions that some spells can cure in an instant, and limb loss being a single regenerate away from inconsequential, can sometimes feel out of reach. I've played in a couple of scattered campaigns and one-shots as a PC, but my longest and most reliable experience with D&D is actually as the DM for a campaign I'm currently running for my friends in a homebrew setting. But since I have experience with both, I'll start with the PC side of things. As a player, you're always going to have less control over the world your character inhabits, but the thing you'll hear over and over again, which I am going to repeat because it's just good advice, is to communicate openly with your DM. If ableism is something you don't want to deal with in the fantasy world you escape into on the weekends, that's something that should come up preferably in a session 0 or before. Your DM is also going to have to approve of any homebrew involved in creating your disabled character, so once again, communication is key. And if you find yourself in a position where your DM or other players at your table are making you uncomfortable, please just leave. I know that's easier said than done, but as the saying goes, no D&D is better than bad D&D. I've heard far too many horror stories about other players at the table trying to cure their party members' disabilities. Most of them have actually come from my own comments section. Which is another thing. If you're in a D&D group and a PC in your campaign is disabled, do not try to heal them without talking to their player first. That's really just basic table etiquette. You don't try to mess with another player's character without consulting the player. Even if their end goal for their character is to find a cure for them, I can guarantee you that having that cure come out of nowhere from a party member is not what they had in mind. As for how you can play a disabled character mechanically, homebrew is your friend. The most famous example is probably the Combat Wheelchair by Sarah Thompson, link in the description, but if you can't find what you need in the wild, you can always create your own. I once played a ranger who wore braces to ease their chronic pain. The homebrew for that was exceedingly simple. When they wore their braces, they had the basic stats reflected on their sheet. When they didn't, they had disadvantage on certain rolls like athletics and acrobatics. You can go more or less complicated depending on how you want to play things. Maybe your sorcerer's staff is actually a cane. Maybe your fighter is mute and communicates in sign language. Maybe your ranger's animal companion is big enough to ride because resting on the back of their trusted friend is a good way to conserve spoons while traveling. I warmly recommend watching the first season of Fantasy High if you want a good practical example of something like this. How they handle Adine's anxiety was, in my opinion, absolutely stellar, and a great example of how disability and mental illness, when handled properly in-game, can create fantastic and memorable character moments. For a more silly mechanics-focused example from my own campaign, while not directly disabled, one of my PCs is cursed. His weapon is quite literally fused to his wrist by a chain. As the DM, I cannot possibly begin to tell you how delighted I was to hear that. And in our most recent session, as of recording this, I finally had the opportunity to have an enemy yeet him across the field by his axe. It was great. Your character being disabled or having some disability-adjacent themes to them doesn't have to be super serious all the time. It can be, if that's the vibe you want to go for, but it doesn't have to be. I can guarantee you, real disabled people, we tend to have a sense of humor about our situations. But that's just the player side of things. Now, for the DMs in the room. First off, I am not saying you have to incorporate disability into your campaigns. Your table, your game, it literally does not affect me what you choose to do in it. But for those of you who are interested in exploring disability at your table, here's a quick rundown of the basic stuff I do. The first and most obvious thing to consider is how to handle acquired disabilities in a world with magical healing. I tend to favor a system where a lost limb can be reattached, if it can be found and kept in good condition until a spell is cast to reattach it, but regrowing limbs or other lost body parts from nothing isn't something I allow in my games. Any spell that says it cures deafness or blindness doesn't work on people who were deaf or blind prior to any current condition affecting the party. That one feels very intuitive to me because when I think of deafness and blindness as combat conditions or status effects, I usually assume some kind of temporary disorienting force is involved. An explosion making the PC's ears ring, or smoke getting in their eyes, or, magic. Paralysis as a condition in combat is obviously also different from any form of medical paralysis. In my games, basic healing won't work on injuries that are too old or congenital conditions. Some things might require specialized magic to treat, which the party would not have access to on the road. If one of my PCs experiences a disabling injury, that's going to have consequences, and the party is going to have to find suitable assistive tech for them before they can continue. That might sound harsh, but I've purposefully built my world to be such that most larger cities will have the resources they need. Need regular medication? There's either an apothecary or an herbalist somewhere in the local area who'd be happy to help. Assistive tech? Blacksmiths, tinkerers, and artificers all have their own spin on things. Don't know what exactly the problem is? There's probably a trained healer somewhere, and failing that, any sufficiently high-level cleric might be able to help. These are all things that most D&D cities will probably have. It's not hard to take what already exists in your setting and ask, okay, where and how do disabled people fit into this? On the NPC side of things, it gets even easier. All you have to do is get in the habit of describing disabled NPCs with the same casual flair as you'd mention that someone has brown hair. I've also found it helps to consider the societies and folk groups in your setting, especially the different abilities across various playable species and what kind of disabilities might be more or less prevalent or even completely unique to certain groups. And, of course, listen to your players. If a player comes to you and asks to play a disabled character, please don't turn them down flat. Work with them to create the character they want to play. I understand it might seem daunting at first, but it really doesn't have to be. At the end of the day, this is a game and we're here to have fun. You don't have to worry about being super accurate or sidestepping every pitfall, so long as you communicate with your players and actually hear them out if they have any issues. The only situation in which I'd caution you to make sure you're doing things right is if you're doing an actual play podcast or something. Because then your audience grows beyond your table and any representation you or your players bring to the table will be placed under much harsher scrutiny. Rightfully so. And last, and certainly least, to all of those who got so incredibly upset about a combat wheelchair of all things, and continue to complain that disability in D&D is unrealistic. It's a fantasy game with magic and dragons. If your issue with disabled people in D&D is the realism, I don't know what to tell you except maybe go sit down and think about why that's your automatic reaction. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, consider liking it and maybe subscribing. I will be back here Thursday after next. Bye!